Okay, so we are recording. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to week 3. We're going to look specifically at principles and practice this week. So on Blackboard, I have also included a PowerPoint. So it's a PowerPoint outlining specific planning and observation and assessment for learning, all sorts of strategies and observation formats. Just for those of you who aren't so familiar with the early childhood practices in the form of observation strategies and techniques, and also planning as well. So I go right into things like the emergent curriculum and give you some examples as well. So for those of you who aren't so experienced in the early years, and there does seem to be a few of you out there, this will provide you with some important foundational knowledge and understanding. So also after yesterday's face-to-face lecture, after going through, because today we're going to, or this evening we're going to look at principles and practice and intentional teaching practices as well. And some of our international students who want to, when they go back home, they want to actually implement some of the early childhood teaching philosophies into their kindergartens back there. They were a bit unsure about exactly what intentional teaching was, even though we broke it down in the lecture. So I put another PowerPoint up, and it's got specific examples of practice. So I've pulled out some really good clips that I've found that actually give you examples of what it means. So teaching students using their interests. What was another one? Just specific intentional teaching practices. So if you are interested, it's there, like all of the resources. They may not relate to everyone, but you never know, they might be helpful for you. And not just in terms of your assessment or your focus, but also your professional practice as well. Okay, so we've got 12 participants here. Excellent. Very good. One other thing that I wanted to mention to you before we started was the assessment task sheet. I had a wonderful email today from one of your fellow students, a colleague, Julie. She was wonderful in that she noted a discrepancy in the task sheet. And it's wonderful. I love it when I know I can rely on at least one person to pick up some typos or some errors. So this one was quite important. So if you have printed out the task sheet already, disregard it. So I'm talking about the task sheet on the Blackboard site for assessment task 1. Up the top, it says length 2,250 to 2,500 words. And it says this reference list is not part of the word count, and that is correct. So your word count, so maximum 2,500 words, that includes direct quotes and in-text references, but the reference list is not part of that word count. So that's on top of the word count. But then when we go down further, it actually states, in fact, yes, it is. So there's a discrepancy there. So just to alert you to that if there is any confusion. Now, there's also a note down here on page 2, for those of you that are listening at home as well, that says some people talk about university assignments tolerating a 10% variation. Please note the 10% variation has been accounted for in the word limit. Okay, I'm changing that. I've actually changed it. I am giving you that 10% variation. So you can have 10% under the word count of 2,500 or 10% over as well. That's standard practice at QUT, so I'm going to adhere to that. Any questions at all? No? Okay, excellent. So I will actually, just in case you're either not here tonight or you actually don't get an opportunity to listen to the recording, I will be posting an email just outlining that as well. So if ever you do see any discrepancies or anything, please let me know, because I do rely on wonderful students to inform me if there is an issue. Okay, so let's get straight into some of the key principles in our national curriculum document. So looking at the Early Years Learning Framework Principles, the ELF, first one, secure, respectful and reciprocal relationships. So this is about having an understanding and being very aware of children's thoughts and feelings. It's also about positively interacting with each individual child in their learning and also in the development of their sense of well-being. So those two important points. Partnerships, for those of you who are already in the field and are teaching in kindergartens or possibly birth to two, partnerships are essential. So working in partnerships with families within that early childhood setting. So creating a warm and welcoming environment for all children and their families to make them feel like they can approach you and can share their practices or ask questions when they need to. Another important point is collaborating with early childhood professionals. So this could be pediatricians, it could be speech therapists. So all of those specialists that you may have to deal with. Also parents and people within the community as well. So this is very important to ensure that learning, that experiences are very meaningful to each of the children in your care. Okay, high expectations and equity. So believing that all children are able to succeed, so regardless of cultural diversity and abilities, having high expectations for all children, high expectations in terms of their achievement, to ensure that all children have opportunities to achieve their learning outcomes. So it's about respecting diversity as well as point number 4. So respecting and valuing and reflecting the values and beliefs of all families within the setting. Another point, I guess, in terms of that respect for diversity is showing consideration for and respect of languages, of histories, traditions, family lifestyle practices, so for all families within the setting. And another aspect as well, very important within the ELF principles, is promoting a greater understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, language, and also contributions as well. That's very significant. So the final one, ongoing learning and reflective practice. This is essential in early childhood education, well, across education everywhere, that we are lifelong learners. So continually improving professional knowledge and our learning practices. That's central. And also valuing the knowledge of the families and the community, and also the prior knowledge of students. Their contributions are very important, and especially when we're using an emergent curriculum and project-based and inquiry-based learning. And it's also important to make sure that we gather information that supports children's learning and development. And this is directly from the parents, because we do acknowledge that the parents know their children best, far more than we will ever know them. So that communication about their needs, their interests, all of those things is vital. Any questions? Please feel free to interrupt at any point. There will be points where I will be asking you to share your ideas and your experiences. So please don't think you're just going to be sitting there hearing me banter on all for an hour. That's not going to happen. Okay, so
Can
I
I ask
wanted
a
to,
question?
please do.
So after last week's lecture and
Yeah.
looking over this week as well, I ended up actually last week going away and speaking to a couple of colleagues of mine because, to be like completely honest, I have never heard of any of these frameworks or have them referred to as the curriculum. I'm in a primary setting.
Mm-hmm.
It's all just the Australian curriculum, maybe some age appropriate pedagogies, but is anyone else in the same boat? Like, I obviously now know that they exist and I've unpacked them the best I can, but
Yeah.
it's actually sort of created my topic for my assignment, that how can these things exist but not be embedded in schools?
Okay, and that is the reason why is because the early years learning framework is in terms it's for birth to year 3, but with that introduction of the prep year, as I was talking about, and I'll refer to it again, we really did lose the focus of early childhood practices within the early years of primary school. And a huge amount of research was done about this. And that is why the, the age appropriate pedagogies was introduced. And the fact that you're still not hearing about it is disturbing. But there, I think
Yeah.
there is more of a focus, as I said, on that birth to 5 years of age in terms of the ELF and the QKLG. Where are you based?
In Metro region.
In Brisbane?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, Ipswich.
Ipswich, yeah. Yeah, so um, I think the focus, they just aren't, very few schools will focus on the early years learning framework. I think it is very much seen as a kindergarten, but I would be focusing, I would discuss that, but I would put a lot of emphasis on those age appropriate pedagogies in terms of your school-based early years practices.
Yep.
So Felicity's saying, yep, same here. Yeah.
So would this
Um,
be considered a good issue in early childhood?
I think so. I think definitely. But I think the chances of any schools referring to or reflecting on ELF, I think that's not going to happen. It
Yeah.
really isn't going to happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's okay. It's a really good question. Yeah,
Thank you.
really good question. So, if you haven't actually heard of the early years learning framework, you probably haven't had a lot of dealings with the QKLG either. So that's the specific Queensland early years curriculum framework. And so for your reference, these are the principles. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can go and have a look at the QKLG and look at the breakdown of the principles, but they are very, very similar to the ELF. So I think in some ways, I do believe they are a little bit more detailed in some regards. I think it really does mention more that holistic approach to learning. So children learning and developing in interconnected ways. And I guess respect for and response for diversity is still there, shared decision making, but it actually pulls out as one of the principles intentional teaching. And I think if this is something that you're very serious about in terms of, early childhood practice within those early years programs, I would definitely have a look at what they're saying about intentional teaching and reflective practice. And I'm really going to pull that apart now, but also in the clip the clips that I put up on Blackboard today, those intentional teaching practices, because that really is a big focus of play-based learning environments. There is a concern, I think, that when we do use the term play-based learning environments, it gets a little bit confused with free play. So in kindergarten, you know, and even in early years, prep to year 3, they talk about, oh, it's free play time, but it's not free play as such. I don't like that term. It's more play-based learning with the use of intentional teaching practices. So that's something that we really need as early childhood educators to reflect on, those intentional teaching practices. So with your experience in early childhood education and care, for those of you who have taught in the area, and also the unit readings, you will notice there is an emphasis on holistic approaches. So while we may plan and assess with a particular curriculum focus in mind, we need to see children's learning as integrated and interconnected, so across all facets of learning. So this also, I guess, it involves the connectedness between mind, between body, and also spirit as well. So as early childhood educators, this involves paying careful attention and observing children's physical, personal, social, and emotional, and also spiritual well-being. So by spiritual well-being, I actually mean, or the curriculum refers to their sense of awe and wonder, and that exploration of being and knowing. And I think this is kind of, we could see it as part of the hidden curriculum in some way, because as teachers, that's something that we take for granted. But in terms of developing that love of learning and an understanding of how children think as learners, we really need to look at that spiritual well-being. So in response to children's evolving ideas and interests, we should also assess and extend their learning. We can do this through open-ended questioning. We can also provide feedback, challenge their thinking with this questioning, so they encourage them to investigate, to explore, to problem solve, and also to guide their thinking as well with those open-ended questions. So on the slide, you can see 4 holistic approaches. So these are holistic approaches to learning, and you'll find them in the early years framework on page, I think it's 14 and 14 to 18. So have a look at those. So learning through play, scaffolding, intentional teaching, and cultural competence. So it's about active engagement. So really providing children with space, with time, and appropriate resources. I guess in some ways, teachers, they're facilitators, I guess you can see, facilitators of learning, because in some ways that exploration of objects, people, and thinking about representations, we're guiding their learning. So scaffolding, so it's an approach originally from Bruner. So educated decisions and actions, they're built on children's existing knowledge and skills. So we scaffold their learning and knowledge in one area into another. And that will also be based on their interests as well. So if they're interested in a specific area, we can assist them to learn through using that interest in another area. Again, referring back to the emergent curriculum. So intentional teaching, this is vital. So educators using that deliberate, purposeful and thoughtful action. So everything is, all of their questions and their actions are very purposefully thought out. It's also about really good observation and carefully listening to the children. And it's also recognizing that learning occurs in social contexts. So Alma Fleet had some really good insights. The second worldview clip that you were asked to read, she had some fabulous insights into the socially constructed evolution of knowledge. So did anyone get the opportunity to have a look at the clip? Yeah, Pamela, what did you think?
Sorry, just had to unmute myself. I actually watched both clips that were down for our prescribed.
Yeah.
I found it a lot easier to interact with the videos, and it was just, I found them mind-boggling in some ways, because there was so much coming out of these people, so much knowledge and so much experience, and but then I think at the same time they were very vulnerable, because they were also they were explaining their own points of view and their own experiences, and how they've come to have this knowledge and how they've come to appreciate people in the past who have kind of taught them and guided them. And it made me reflect on, wow, maybe one day I could be one of those people for someone else. Yeah. So yeah, I really enjoyed the videos. I really enjoy them.
I particularly, I thought that when Alba was talking about that transmission view of learning, so moving from the idea of teaching small children from filling that empty vessel, or people talk about, oh, they're like sponges. So from that to the importance of really listening to children, and not just listening, but hearing what they have to offer and expanding on that prior knowledge and the perspectives that they have. When you actually sit down and listen and hear children, rather than interrupting and preempting what you think they're going to say, they have so much to express. And I actually have to say that this is what makes me love early childhood teaching so much, is just listening to children and their perspectives on the world. It's really fascinating, and it's a very exciting space to work in. And so this also intersects with the work of Peter Moss, one of our key readings for the week as well, so that, that socially constructed evolution of knowledge.
Angela, sorry.
So has anyone had any experience with the emergent curriculum in your travels, in your work in early childhood? Because I know we do have some teachers here. I'm a big advocate of using the emergent curriculum. So it's very much an approach that focuses on being responsive to children's interests and to their prior knowledge, and to encourage active participation. So as I said, teachers are seen as the facilitators of learning. So I gave you an example on the PowerPoint. I'm not sure, yes, it does, Belinda, fit in with the age-appropriate pedagogies, most definitely. But very much in the PowerPoint, I gave an example of one of my teaching, an experience that I had with some students. So I'd like you to actually have a look at that in terms of really encouraging students to work together and socially construct their knowledge. So have a look at the PowerPoint that I put on Blackboard, the one with observations and planning on it as well. The mic isn't working. Oh, your mic isn't working, Megan. Not the readings? Okay, you should be able to access the readings on the Q. I'll check. Did anyone else have any issue with the readings? You had to search them in the library. That's a good way to go, Pamela. If for some reason the link to the readings or they're not available, I would definitely suggest that you just cut and paste it and put it into the library database. You should be able to get majority of the readings there. If you can't, please contact me. There are some issues with copyright, so if you do have any concerns with the readings, please make sure you let me know. I can't assist or give advice unless I can help. Yeah, because the journal names are given, so you should be able to access them. And as I said last week as well, if you do have any issues with database searching, please book in either possibly a Zoom session with the library, or if you're local, you can go in and have a chat with someone in HiQ to help you. Okay, I've lost my train of thought. It's not unusual, especially after such a long day. What were we talking about? Oh, cultural competence. So we've talked about intentional teaching practice. So cultural competence, this involves, as it says, respecting multiple ways of knowing, so celebrating the benefits of diversity, it's about honouring differences, and being aware of those differences and making sure you take those into consideration in all aspects of your work. Okay, so early years teaching and learning, it really does focus very heavily on developing children's love of learning and also about, you know, metacognition. So exploring how they learn, so encouraging them to think about thinking. And a lot of people really don't believe that children can think at these levels, but they can. I think we need to be more open to what children are actually capable of young children. So it's about encouraging children's motivation and their engagement in learning. So we need to value, be responsive to all of their strengths, their abilities and their interests. And this was, again, outlined in the conversations in the worldview clips in this week's learning guide. And questions, I think, as Belinda said, were posed around pedagogical approaches, those age-appropriate approaches. And specifically, I think it was in the second clip, Felicity McCardle talked about rules for breaking rules. That was very interesting. I think Belinda said she watched the clips, but with the example she gave about teaching children to draw, this is an area that I'm particularly interested in, children's artwork and creativity, because early childhood principles would discourage us to actually teach children to draw. We had a wonderful conversation with some of our international students yesterday evening in the face-to-face about this. So I guess in early childhood, we would avoid imposing rules and technical boundaries that may limit young children's exploration and their creativity and their imagination as well. What are your thoughts on this? It's a bit controversial, I guess, in some ways. Yep, so it was about explicitly teaching maths as well. Yeah, reading the comments. Anyone else?
I found it interesting when she said that, like, she was an art teacher, and then how years later people had commented on how well her children could draw. And it was because she actually had taught them to draw. But what struck me was that she felt guilty about it. Yeah. And so I just thought, yeah, because I think our first step as teachers is we want to show the children how to do things, and sometimes stepping back because sometimes you can see how they really like might be experiencing some kind of emotional situation because they don't know how to do something, and so you want to swoop in and rescue them, and how do you bridge that divide? How do you find that like sweet spot? You know, what exactly do you do and what don't you do? So yeah,
I agree. It is definitely a sweet spot, but it's not just, it's about, as well, as parents, we're constantly wanting to rescue our children and provide them with assistance. But I think with everything, we need to step back. Sorry, I've got an eyelash in my eye. We have to step back and really allow them to observe, to have that freedom of creativity and expression. So, it's often, I think, if we do step in and show them the right way, or even to question what they're actually doing, it really can lead them to losing confidence in what they do. And, it promotes a fear as well, a fear that what they've created isn't right. So, for example, we were talking last night about, asking a child to draw a dog, and then, oh, no, that's not right. That doesn't look like a dog. But how does a child perceive a dog? It could be very different to how we do as well. So we can't, put our perspectives onto what they're actually doing. Sorry. So I guess early childhood perspectives and theorists would support that younger children shouldn't be taught to draw, but rather they should be given the tools and the freedom to experiment, and we should support their efforts with, open-ended questions. If they come up to you and ask, can you draw a dog for me? Or say, well, what does a dog look like? How many legs does a dog have? Let's go and have a look at some pictures of a dog. What does a dog's tail do? What noise does a dog make? And all those sorts of things. So those open-ended questions to encourage them to explore and not to be afraid to try. Any further thoughts about that at all?
We have two little boys in prep this year, and in the kindy teacher last year had that same sort of philosophy that no, don't intervene, just let them do as they please. And both of these boys, when you get them to draw anything, it is just scribble all over the page. You could flip back to anything and they could tell you exactly what it is, but for us to look at, there's no difference between these pictures. And so our fear for them by not intervening is that they're really going to struggle once we start expecting them to write with a pencil on paper, because to watch them draw, they've got no pencil grip. They just seem to have no control whatsoever of what they're doing. It's like it's getting lost in translation between brain and paper. And so our worry is that once they're moved out of the sand and the water and stuff doing their letters and try to put that to paper, they're also not going to have any control with that either.
But the fact that they're actually creating, they're putting pen to paper, means that they are practicing those fine motor skills. If you were to discourage it by saying, oh, what are you drawing? And they sort of, they have to make something up. So instead of saying, what are you drawing? You would say, would you like to tell me about what you're drawing? And they may say no, and that's fine. But what you need to do as an early childhood educator in that space is to provide them with materials, provide them with chunky crayons, to provide them with paint, with charcoal, to provide them with Play-Doh to develop those fine motor skills. A lot of young children outside of kindy, they don't get that opportunity anymore. A lot of them are spending time with their Padlets, and they can do all sorts of motions with that, but other than going to kindergarten and in daycare, a lot of children aren't getting that opportunity to explore, to mix colors, to find out if I mix these two colors together, what will happen. So it's all about providing those materials. And I saw a question on the chat, can you teach them the skills though? That's exactly what you're doing. You're encouraging them to explore and experiment. You may want to introduce different, thicknesses of paint and to get them to do finger painting. If a child is really interested in something and approaches you and wants you to actually assist them, that's fine if they're at a certain level, but you really have to be careful not to impose your ideals of what something should or shouldn't be onto them. We need to encourage them to keep on trying and to develop, and giving them that exploration is where that will really help. Another consideration, there may be that they are boys as well. Yep, Steiner school for a while, very strict instruction on how to draw, but prior to this they were encouraged to experiment with drawing. So yep, it's definitely age appropriate as well. That's a really good point, Kate. So I guess moving into those early primary years, that's when those skills can really start to be developed, and we may want to do some direct instruction. But in the early years, that encouragement of exploration is, I think, is essential. So we really, our aim is to provide them with the materials and the encouragement. Excellent. Sorry, I'm just catching up with the chat. I've never taught children to draw. I prefer to praise and model drawing, but allow them to share their own way of expressing themselves. Yeah. I hope you're enjoying your dinner, Elle. Okay. So I guess drawing is a good example, but there are so many other areas that in terms of those worldview clips, it was maths and all sorts of things in terms of teaching skills or encouraging students to explore as well. So explicit math skills and things like that. So in an early childhood setting, we would be counting and singing and encouraging them to explore number. And as their skills and their understandings evolve, then providing further challenges. So building on those skills for individual students. It's very important that with those areas that we work individually. Okay. All right, so on to intentional teaching strategies. As I said before, early childhood teachers, they actively promote children's learning in play-based environments. They move flexibly in and out of different roles, whether it be facilitator or actually more hands-on, something more structured, more direct instruction. So again, this will depend on the needs of the individual student. So these are some of the strategies, you know, challenging students, encouraging collaboration, inviting, explaining, instructing, planning, listening, understanding, extending, inventing, things like, you know, speculating, and again, those really using those open-ended questions. That's vital. So we've got, can definitely see the impacts of relying on explicit teaching too much in a secondary setting when teaching design is a long drawn out process to get them to put ideas down on paper and not worry if it is right. Yeah. Yes. So moving on to the age appropriate pedagogies, and again, like moving into secondary as well, because all of these approaches, they're not just early childhood. These are approaches, event-based approach, project approach, blended approach, all of these things that it's not just early childhood, it's all through secondary and primary as well. So it's about a balance of approaches for rather than just focusing on one specific area. And this is what we're talking about. So it's not just play-based learning in early childhood when we're getting into the prep to year 3. It's a combination of many. So I touched on this last week, and a lot of you are really starting to think about this, especially in terms of that prep to 3 age range. So the initiative, the age-appropriate pedagogies, was actually introduced in 2016. So it was designed to refocus attention on the importance of age-appropriate pedagogies for teaching children, so in Queensland early years environments. So the purpose of the program was to identify effective pedagogies from the research literature. So pedagogies to, I guess, assist and empower teachers to expand their repertoire of practices. So this is to make informed decisions about curriculum and teaching. So as I said, it was about having a balanced approach. So based on deliberate and purposeful and thoughtful decision making. So again, I guess we can go back to, you know, those understandings of what play-based learning was. And I think there was a move away from play-based learning because it was thought to be more like free play, as we were talking about before. So, you know, these age-appropriate pedagogies, they're reinforcing approaches that need to really be based on children's needs, their interests, their capabilities, and also the teachers' skills as well, and their needs, their philosophy, so their pedagogical beliefs, of course, the curriculum, and evidence of children's learning as well. So it's also about assessment for learning. And the other thing that's very important to consider is the context as well, the context within which the teaching is taking place, as opposed, you know, in terms of your choice of approaches or combination of approaches. So on the slide, we've got the 7 approaches to teaching and learning. Yeah, inquiry, explicit, blended, event-based, play-based, project approach, and direct teaching, because there is, as we've said, there is definitely the need for direct teaching and instruction at points. And as children get older, you will find that that direct teaching and instruction will become more and more significant. Any questions at all? So on the slide, you can see the associated characteristics. So these, I guess, represent a set of desirable qualities that teachers can consider when working with children in those age groups. It's about being responsive to each individual child, their context, and the purpose for their learning. So in the age-appropriate documents that I've put on, they're on Blackboard, you can read in detail about that. And also if you Google age-appropriate pedagogies, you can see the documents that will explicitly give you information about all of those areas for you to compare and contrast those curriculum documents if you're looking at things like ACARA as well, in terms of your assessment focus. So I guess one of the things that you'll probably be considering if you are discussing age-appropriate pedagogies is the research and the anecdotal evidence that showed that in the years after the introduction of PrEP in Queensland, there really was a change in the pedagogies employed in early years of primary classrooms. So as we were discussing before, and some of the reasons around this, I guess, was it was a response to the crowded nature of the curriculum and pressure from parents and governing bodies for improved performance. So as we can see with the introduction of things like NAPLAN, very much a focus on performance-based pedagogies and data collection, and again, that devaluing of play-based learning as a valid pedagogy for children in early primary. So as a result, the teaching really did become more teacher-centred and narrow with fewer opportunities for children to really engage in that active learning. So there are lots of material that intersects with the early years learning framework and the 4 age-appropriate pedagogies as well. So it's a really, you really need to, for your focus, to compare and contrast the curriculum documents, and it was suggested in your learning notes this week that you might want to map out across the curriculum documents as well. It would be really useful when you're working towards your assessment task. So looking across the different curriculum frameworks and documents. All right, so we'll go a little bit into, as you would know, those of you that work in early childhood, professional partnerships. It's a big part of the early years learning framework. So building those quality relationships, and it's also part of the Early Childhood Australia Code of Ethics as well. So promoting that collaborative, critically reflective practice, those supportive relationships. So again, that's central to early childhood practice. So, yep, strong partnerships with families, partnerships that support and enhance children's learning and their well-being as well, because we can't have effective learning without children's mental and physical health and well-being as well. So as we said before, you know, these really do, these partnerships will assist in developing that deep understanding of the children's strengths, their interests, and their needs. And it's going to build that trust as well. So parents do feel like that they can be part of the curriculum decision making. Yep, so sharing information regularly, it enables educators, children and support staff to develop a shared understanding about the child's learning. Okay, so I guess I wanted to just give you the opportunity to really think about, I guess, that focus that you have for your assessment task. Is there any of you that are still in that conceptualizing phase, so still not completely sure about the direction that you want to take with your assessment task? Is there anyone that wants to talk about that?
Angela, I'm still conceptualizing.
You're
Sorry.
still conceptualizing. Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. So Elle says she's got the research question, but she just doesn't know where to begin. So the most important thing that you need to do, if you do have that research question, is you need to start searching the databases for specific research. So I've also popped in a PowerPoint this week. Oh my goodness, it's been a week of PowerPoints for me, hasn't it? About note-taking and doing readings at QUT, and or just anywhere in any study as well. So you might want to have a look at that, and it sort of breaks down things like when you're doing a reading, how to actually take notes, and you know, I actually chunk the readings and pull out the important parts and specific references as well that I may want to use in my writing. But it's time now to really start searching, and this is where you can get the assistance from the librarians at QUT from HiQ. Yep, and stop overthinking and making sure that you're focusing your reading on your specific topic and keeping track on that. And what I would also start to do is looking at the structure of your assessment task, because it's all there for you, even with the word count. So what you need to do is to start taking notes and dot points within those particular areas. Hopefully that will help you in terms of getting started, Em, and Alex as well. and L. Yeah. Felicity, yeah. So it's all about really starting to concentrate on looking at the research and really mapping out the curriculum documents in regards to your question. So having a good in-depth look at them. Is there anyone that wants to talk about a specific topic? Because these, it's important that your focus area really is on something that is important to you, an area that you feel quite passionate about, and that the more important it is to you, the easier it's going to be to formulate your ideas and your understandings and to actually find that research.
Angela?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, it's Caitlin. Hi, everyone. Well, I have good ideas for my question, but I'm worried if it's too specific for this topic or this unit, because I work in libraries coordinating the early childhood programs. And so I'd like to do a question about, I guess, how to inform the babies program, Giggle and Wiggle, for 0 to 2 year olds with, I guess, best practice baby pedagogies or something around. Is that too specific for this unit?
No, not at all. And then you would relate it to the, whereabouts are you situated?
In Canberra.
In Canberra. So you would relate it to the national curriculum, the early years learning framework, and definitely, well, that would be the one that you would use for the birth to 2. But so that would be the most significant one for you. Is there anything, a document in Canberra that is used for the early years? It would be.
They did used to have one, but it's, from my understanding, it's not really used at all. Like Canberra use, basically, if there's some national document that's released, Canberra sort of just adopts that. They don't hold on to their own stuff. Yeah.
No, so yeah, so that's really what you would be needing to concentrate on. I would be looking at specific research within that birth to 2 area. So was there a particular focus? Was it on library programs or?
Yeah, I guess this is a singing and rhyme time half-hour program that we run every day of the week across all the branches, and just looking at how to make that quality instructional teaching, but it is more aimed at the parents. Obviously the children are benefiting because they're joining in and the parents are learning some songs.
Definitely. So you would probably want to use key terms like playgroup and things like that as well in terms of finding the research around that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, and that goes with all of your research. So don't just focus on the keywords that you've got within your focus or your question. You know, explore further afield as well to look for other research, like other keywords that may be linked as well. So think about it in different ways. And this is where QUT, where the library and the people that, you know, that can give you advice on the databases. So the student connect, this is where they can really help you on your specific focus in terms of doing those searches for research. So I really do, I know I keep going on and on about it, but you really do need to make contact with that student support group.
So Angela?
Yeah.
This is Meg. I've actually went into uni. I'm in Brisbane, but I went in for the first time and I just went to the high queue. And it was an open time to see a librarian, and because there was no one else there, she actually spoke to me for 45 minutes and said, "What's your research question?" And she was putting it through, and so
you're amazing.
Yeah, so that was really good.
I don't think anyone believes me. I'm glad. So there you go.
Yeah, so they are good.
Yeah, 45 minutes, and you know they can really assist you. And I'm sure they have support for external students that, you know, if you're not able to face-to-face, they will be able to assist you other ways as well. So, you know, I would even organise a Zoom or something, or over the phone. I would send them an email and ask for some assistance. Anything else? So Pamela, I have a question, but then start thinking about other possibilities. Oh yes. No, stop thinking about other possibilities, Pamela. Focus. Yes, focus on
Okay.
and start searching. So that's vital.
Yeah, doing that.
Good, good. Yeah, and no overthinking. So, yep, Catherine, send me that. I won't necessarily look at drafts, but I will assist you and guide you within certain parameters. Yes.
That's okay, because I definitely don't have a draft. I wish I did. I'm happy to share because I'm, obviously with my question earlier about the inconsistencies in the curriculum and the frameworks that are used, especially in the primary setting. And in my role, and something that's current for me at the moment is, all of the recent research about the science of reading and the teaching of reading in the early years. So for me, it's really gotten me quite passionate about what feels like just experimental, programs or some new theory that seems to be the way that's, but there's nothing in concrete for the Department of Education that says this is best practice, this is what we do, and this is what schools implement. Like, it really is just a roll the dice to choose a school that may or may not teach reading in the right way. So I guess my research question was shaping to sound something like the inconsistent approach to the teaching of reading in the early years.
Excellent. No, that's a great one. That's
awesome.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Anyone else want to share or have a question? You, as I said, I know majority of you have now contacted me with your ideas. Some of you have changed a few times, but that's good. That's all part of conceptualizing, but you really need to start now. This is time now to really start getting things down on paper and looking at that structure. So we're in week 3. So the assessment task is due in week 7. So in week 6, we're going to have, the session will actually be very much about receiving feedback, making sure that you're on the right track. And then week 7, prior to the assessment being due, is about tidying it up. You've got an independent study week that week to finalise it. But of course, I will still be available to support you in that week if you want to email me or have a chat on the phone or whatever. So yeah, I'm doing play-based learning. I went to the key. I've got a ton of books to help you. Very excited to start now. Excellent. That's great to hear. Great to hear. Okay, I think we might finish up now. What I will do is say goodbye to those of you listening at home and remind you to email me with any questions or your ideas, and I will put that email out just to remind everyone about the referencing and the 10% leeway, plus or minus with the word count too. That's really important. Any further questions? Okay, one moment, bear with me. Okay, I am going to stop the recording.